When he stepped through the gate to check on the dogs barking, his vision blurred, because at the threshold stood a tiger. And it stared at him as if it had been waiting. It was late, well past midnight, when the dogs' frantic howls cut through the stillness of the night. Their cries were neither wolfish nor playful, they sounded terrified. He grabbed his old hunting rifle, more for comfort than use, and crept toward the fence. The moon was a pale sliver, and the air felt heavy, as though nature itself held its breath. He froze when he reached the gate. There, in the dim light, loomed an immense tiger. Its fur gleamed briefly with silver streaks, and its broad shoulders made the fence seem fragile. It did not snarl. It did not snatch at the bars. It simply stood, rigid and silent, eyes locked on his. Heart pounding, he raised his rifle, finger tensed on the trigger. Yet his arm trembled so badly he doubted he could fire. Still, every instinct screamed to defend his home. The tiger, however, remained unnervingly calm. Its tail flicked once, then stilled. It did not retreat. Neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the dogs and now by his standoff. A woman in a pink bathrobe gasped, a man with a lantern stood at the corner of the path. They shone their lights on the tiger, but the beast paid them no heed. The villagers' faces were ghostly in the lamplight, white, terrified, awed. Not a single shot rang out. No demon leap of violence shattered the night. The tiger was no threat. And yet, the crowd dared not approach. None moved. He felt the collective pulse of fear. But he felt something else, too, the uncanny sense that this creature waited for something beyond themselves. He looked at me as if waiting for me to understand, he would later say, voice trembling even now at the memory. He inched closer, rifle half raised, heart hammering. The tiger tilted its head, amber eyes reflecting the lantern glow. For a moment, man and beast were equals, caught in a silent communion. Every hair on his neck stood on end. He swallowed, saliva dried in his mouth. Perhaps it was the echo of an ancient memory, something primal whispering across the ages, that kept him from fleeing. Something told him this was not an attack. This was an invitation. A sudden bark jolted him. One of the dogs, cowering behind the man, yipped. He glanced down, and when he looked back, the tiger had taken a deliberate step. It pivoted toward the narrow track leading into the forest. He exhaled, almost without thinking, and lowered the rifle. Thought he'd turn and vanish back into the woods, but the tiger moved forward, toward the trees. Then he paused. Turned his head. Waited. The false ending replayed in his mind, this was surely the moment it would flee, vanish into the darkness as if it had never been. Yet it did not. It held its ground for a heartbeat longer, then moved again, ever so slowly, into the black mouth of the woods, glancing back once as if beckoning him to follow. The neighbors watched, silent and motionless, their breaths shallow. No one dared speak. No one dared move. In that suspended moment, the line between fear and wonder blurred. He stood at the threshold of the unknown, rifle still in hand, torn between instinct and something ineffable. Behind him, the gate creaked as it swung closed with the breeze. He dared not look away. His heart thundered in his ears. The tiger's shape disappeared among the ancient trunks, but its presence lingered like a promise, or a warning. He lowered the rifle completely and met the neighbors' eyes. They all saw the same thing, something impossible had just unfolded. They felt the hush of life waiting to resume normal rhythm, yet knowing it never would. He gulped, throat tight. "You saw it?" the man with the lantern whispered. He nodded, unable to speak at first. Then the words tumbled out, sharp and amazed, it was waiting for me. It wasn't going after us. It wanted us to follow. Silence swallowed his words. He looked back at the darkness where the tiger had gone. No roar, no snap of jaws, only the soft rustle of leaves. The forest seemed to exhale. Some instinct pulled at him, a call deeper than fear or curiosity. He wanted to chase after that improbable guide. But he stood frozen, torn between the safety of the village and the uncharted wild beyond. The others trembled beside him, drawn by the same unspoken force. Then, as if granting them a final glimpse of its grace, the tiger's silhouette reappeared between two trees. It paused in the silver glow, muscles rippling, then turned and vanished for good. The forest swallowed it whole. He had expected it to run away, expecting the nightmare to end. Instead, it left an echo in his soul, a question he could not answer: why had it come, and why had it waited for him? And so he remained at the gate, rifle lowered, heart racing, staring into the night. The dogs were silent now. The village held its breath. Because something had changed forever under the moonlit sky. He could not yet know what that change would bring, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would never look at the wilderness the same way again. He stood at the edge of the village path, the rifle forgotten in his hand, while the others hesitated behind him. The tiger did not move away. Its massive head was lifted, ears pricked, as though listening to some silent command. Heartbeats thundered in the hush that fell over the small crowd. Fear held them frozen, but something deeper urged them forward. A woman in a faded floral dress emerged from the cluster, tears streaking her face. Her voice shook as she explained that her grandson had vanished that morning, last seen chasing a stray goat toward the forest's edge. At her words, a collective understanding rippled through the group: this was no random tiger sighting. It was a summons. He swallowed hard, exchanging a glance with the lantern-bearer. The light trembled in the man's hand, casting the tiger's shadow larger than life on the trunks behind. We go after it," he murmured. No one answered. The answer was written in every beating heart. Slowly, they fell in line behind the beast. Silently, the tiger turned its broad shoulders and slipped onto the narrow trail leading into the pines. Every so often it paused, looking back over its shoulder, those deep amber eyes flicking from one terrified face to the next. It was not hurting them away, it was guiding them, checking that they followed. With each glance, it reassured and warned all at once. He felt the muscles in his legs tremble when he took the first step. The underbrush crackled beneath boots and paws, and the scent of damp earth filled his nostrils. His mind raced, a wild tiger leading a band of humans. Impossible. Yet there it walked, calm and precise. Every rustle of leaves made the villagers flinch, only to glance at the tiger and see it unafraid. Their emotions roiled like a storm. One moment, terror surged as a distant twig snapped, the next, awe flooded them when the tiger's confident stride never faltered. Hope fluttered like a timid bird in his chest: perhaps this creature truly knew the forest better than any rescuer could. Perhaps it would lead them to the boy. He wasn't driving us away, he was showing us the way, the man would recall later, voice hushed as if reverent. The path wound deeper under towering firs. Moonlight pooled in swaths, illuminating curious moths that danced around the tiger's muzzle. At times, he thought he saw the beast pause to sniff the air or press a giant paw against a rock, as if marking the correct route. Each gesture felt deliberate, as if the tiger were a seasoned guide. Behind him, the woman clutched her shawl, her eyes wide. The children huddled close, their small fingers gripping their parents' sleeves. An old farmer trailed last, clutching a lantern with knuckles white, but he, too, felt the current of conviction in the air. No one dared speak, no one dared break the spell. They walked for what felt like an eternity. Anxiety gnawed at their resolve: would the tiger suddenly turn savage? Would they ever see the boy again? Yet every time dread threatened to overtake them, the tiger halted just long enough to ensure their footsteps matched its own. They drew courage from that silent acknowledgement. Suddenly, after a series of low murmurs of gratitude passed among them, the tiger paused beneath a moss-covered boulder. It scratched the ground once and looked back. The entire procession slowed to a halt. For a heartbeat, the forest held its breath. They thought the journey ended there. Moonbeams glinted in the tiger's eyes, and in that glint lay the promise of completion. The path ahead was obscured, and the villagers dared to hope the child lay just beyond this point. Relief began to warm their chests. But then the tiger lifted its paw, paused mid-air, and never set it down. It turned its head slightly, nudged the boulder with its massive shoulder, and then resumed walking, deeper, into the whispering pines. We thought he was simply leaving the village, but after a few more minutes he stopped. In that moment, fear and wonder clashed again. The false ending dissolved, replaced by a new, more urgent question: where, in this endless green expanse, would the tiger lead them next? The clearing opened like a secret, sunk low between ancient mounds and choked with tall, reedy grass. Moonlight filtered in pale ribbons, revealing nothing but a sea of waving stalks. The villagers halted at the edge of the marshy dip, hearts hammering. Not a trace of the missing child. No footprints, no cries, nothing but the skitter of insects in the undergrowth. The tiger stepped forward, nose lowered. It sniffed the air, then lifted its head and fixed its gaze on a tight cluster of reeds. A low, rumbling growl vibrated in its chest, short, urgent. The villagers froze. What could it be sensing that was invisible to human eyes? "He's here," whispered the woman with the lantern, voice cracking. They edged forward. The tiger remained calm but insistent, pressing its massive head toward the reeds as if drawing an arrow on the path. It circled the patch, ears flicking, then barked, an almost curious, welcoming sound that made the hair on their necks stand on end. "Listen," someone said. At first all they heard was the breeze in the grass. But then, faint and trembling, came a soft, desperate squeak. A child's cry, little more than a breath, carried on the night air. They parted the reeds as one, hearts in their throats, and there he lay. The boy was curled on his side, drenched in dew and tears, shivering beneath the towering grass. His small arms were drawn in close, mud clung to his cheeks. He had fallen in the morning, spun around by panic in the woods, and lay lost until now. A cry broke from his mother's lips as she tore through the reeds. She dropped to her knees beside him, wrapping him in her arms. The child clung to her, trembling, but breathing. Alive. The tiger watched, every muscle still. It stepped back a pace and settled on its haunches, motionless, silent. Not a muscle twitched except the slow rise and fall of its broad back. Its eyes, copper-bright in the lantern glow, shone with an almost human intensity. He stood beside us as we carried the child, the man would later recall, without a sound. Without movement. Only his eyes, like a man's. Gently, the villagers lifted the boy, one supporting his shoulders, another cradling his legs. His mother's sobs shook her frame as she followed, tears mingling with the dew on his hair. The tiger rose and fell in step behind them, acting as guardian rather than predator. They moved slowly back toward the path. The boy stirred, pressed into his mother's arms, and nestled his face into her shoulder. The villagers dared to breathe more freely. Relief swelled in their chests, this was the end of their nightmare. But as they reached the edge of the clearing, the tiger paused. It turned its head and looked back at them, gaze fixed and unblinking. There was no snarl, no flick of its tail, only that steady, unwavering stare. It did not vanish into the reeds or pick up its own trail. Instead, it lingered, as though waiting for something more. "We thought that was it, that he'd save the child and then leave," the lantern-bearer would say later, voice hushed. But he did not leave. They halted again, terror and gratitude entwined in their hearts. The tiger's silhouette stood between the dark marsh and the deeper black of the forest, a sentry at the gates of a world they barely understood. The boy's mother pressed him closer, and the others clustered behind, casting uneasy glances at the majestic beast. Together, they had found the lost child. But the tiger remained, unmoved, inscrutable, and impossibly present, like a guardian spirit refusing to abandon them until the last tremor of doubt had passed from their souls. He emerged from the reeds last, moving with surprising delicacy for such a colossal creature. The tiger tracked the small procession through the marsh's uneven ground, padding just behind the villagers yet never closing the gap. It was their silent sentinel, shoulders rippling under striped fur, tail brushing reeds but never snagging them. Not once did it break its steady pace or glance back in aggression, only watchfulness. The lantern's glow bobbed along the narrow track as the villagers carried the limp child, careful with each step. Fear hummed beneath their skin, but awe pressed just as fiercely against their chests. Every so often, the tiger would flex a paw, adjusting its position, ensuring the path remained clear and no threat could slip past its sight. It was as if the forest itself had deputized this magnificent beast to escort them safely home. Their breaths came ragged in the cool night air. Some muttered prayers, others held their hands over their mouths, stifling sobs. Yet all eyes flicked to the tiger. It moved with such purpose it felt cruel to question its intent. No wild instinct to kill or to flee. Only the unwavering mission of guardian. At one point, the ground gave way beneath a man's foot. He lurched, nearly dropping the child, but the tiger rounded the corner swiftly and stepped between them. Its flank brushed his leg as a subtle warning, "Remain careful." The man's heart lurched, but when he met the tiger's amber gaze, fear melted into gratitude. He straightened, more mindful of each footfall, eyes never leaving the beast's powerful silhouette. None of us felt threatened, the eldest farmer would later insist, voice hushed as though recalling a dream. Only one thing, we understood nothing about nature. As they reached firm ground, the boy's small body stirred. His mother bent, brushing the damp hair from his forehead. He blinked, confusion in his dark eyes, then whispered, voice brittle, "Who's that, big cat?" They asked him gently what he had seen while lost. The child's lips quivered, and he glanced over his shoulder at the tiger, which paused once more, as though eavesdropping. With a solemn nod, he said, He was my guardian. A giant cat watching over me." Tears pooled in his mother's eyes, and the villagers exchanged glances heavy with wonder. The tiger let out a low, approving rumble that vibrated through the air, and then settled into a calm pace again. No evidence of hunger. No flash of claws. Only soft fur and enormous paws guiding them forward. They reached the edge of the village lane, where lanterns hung from porches and neighbors gathered in cautious circles. The lantern-bearer lifted the child into waiting arms, and everyone exhaled as if releasing a held breath. Relief mingled with disbelief, a cocktail potent enough to make them tremble on their feet. For an instant, they believed the encounter would end here. The tiger would disappear into the tree-line like a phantom, and life would resume its familiar rhythm. Women dabbed their eyes, men lowered weapons they had gripped when terror had briefly seized their souls. The night air felt calmer, the dogs silent now, awaiting the child's reunion. But the tiger did not vanish. It remained on the fringe of lamplight, stripes dissolving into shadow. Its gaze swept the small crowd, measuring them. It stood tall, neither beast nor myth, but something vast and inexplicable. A hush fell. The boy, snug against his mother's chest, turned and offered a small wave toward the tiger. In return, the beast dipped its head, a slow, deliberate nod that spoke of ancient understanding and solemn promise. For a fleeting moment, man and tiger acknowledged one another across the gulf between the tame and the wild. They thought it would end with that silent bow. But he stayed, and did one more thing. Dawn broke in soft pinks and golds, spilling over the village rooftops and into the edges of the forest. He watched from his porch as the tiger reappeared at daybreak, steps fluid as mist, and paused at the tree line. The villagers, bleary-eyed from little sleep, gathered behind him, barely daring to breathe. At that moment, the beast seemed to contemplate the human settlement one last time. Then, without haste, it turned and slipped into the emerald gloom, vanishing as silently as it had arrived. For a full day, the tiger did not return. Life in the village felt hollow, dogs no longer panicked at night, but the memory of their guide lingered in every restless shadow. Mothers hushed their children's questions about tigers, eyes downcast. Hunters checked their rifles more out of habit than fear, but none ventured beyond the fields. The forest itself seemed to hold its secrets close, waiting. On the morning after the tiger's departure, a curious commotion gathered at the gate. A group of villagers pushed aside a low hedge to reveal a fresh carcass of a young doe. Its coat still shone with dew, and neither blade nor toothpick had touched its flesh. The deer lay as if placed with intent, no wounds beyond a single clean bite at the throat. Its limbs were neatly folded under it, and a small spray of wildflowers rested atop its flank, as though placed there in reverence. A hush fell. The same villagers who had trembled in terror now stared, mouths agape. The woman whose grandson had been lost pressed trembling fingers to her mouth. The lantern-bearer's knees buckled, and a farmer steadied him with a gentle arm. None spoke. They all knew what it meant. He had returned life, and left the meat, the elder whispered, voice thick with wonder. So we'd not believe it was just chance. Stories unfurled among the crowd, tales told by elders of the Amur woods, legends that great cats sometimes repay a debt, offering sustenance to those they had spared. Some scoffed at superstition, but most felt the shiver of ancient truth. Who else could have delivered such a precise gift but the tiger, still watching from the silent depths? He knelt to examine the deer. No hunter's mark. No villain's spoor. Only the soft, impressed pattern of huge paw prints leading back into the forest, prints that faded into moss and leaf litter. He rose, brushing his hand over his mouth to catch his breath, and looked at the assembled faces. Each held astonishment, gratitude, a deep-seated reverence. They built a humble shrine beside the gate, a circle of stones around the deer, candles and broken woven baskets, the wildflowers left untouched. Women wept quietly, men bowed their heads. A prayer rose for the child's safety and for the tiger's welfare. Children watched with wide eyes, learning a lesson far greater than any schoolmaster could impart. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened, he wandered alone to the edge of the forest. The deer's shrine glowed faintly behind him. He pressed a hand against an ancient pine and closed his eyes, recalling every moment of the tiger's vigil. He pictured those deep copper eyes, the grace in every step, and the solemn nod as he left them at the village lane. He understood then that the forest had sent them an emissary, a being equal parts predator and guardian. Its gift was more than meat, it was a reminder of the bond that joins all living things. As the chill evening air settled around him, he felt an unfamiliar ache of humility and awe. They thought the story was over. Life would return to normal, crops would be planted, the schoolhouse would reopen, the market would bustle again. But in his heart, he knew that nothing, and no one, could ever quite be the same. The tiger had bestowed a miracle, a debt repaid in flesh and petals, and left them with questions that refused to die. He walked back to the shrine, kneeling to place a single orchid from his own garden atop the stones. His fingers trembled as he whispered thanks, the forest answered with a soft rustle. A distant roar, low and sonorous, rolled through the pines, a promise that their stranger had not forgotten them. It seemed the tale had reached its end. But in his mind, it was just beginning. He spent that night awake, staring into the flickering embers of his hearth, wrestling with a storm of questions. How could he explain what had happened? A tiger, his old adversary and neighbor to the wild, had stepped beyond its nature to guide and protect a human child. It defied every lesson he'd ever learned in a lifetime spent among the trees. He rose before dawn and walked the perimeter of his small clearing, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. Memories tugged at him, tales passed down from the village elders about hunters saved from freezing blizzards by a ghostly guardian, about lost travelers guided back to safety by a pair of glowing eyes appearing at the edge of their campfire glow. He had always dismissed these accounts as folklore, shards of superstition woven into the fabric of frontier life. But now, he understood that the forest had its own ledger of kindnesses, recorded not in ink but in the deeds of its creatures. Later that morning, he accompanied the boy's grandmother to her humble cottage at the outskirts of the village. The woman was small and bent with age, her hands worn like driftwood, her eyes bright with tears. He found her seated by a simple wooden table, clutching a faded shawl that smelled of lavender and old prayers. When she saw him, she rose unsteadily, then sank again, tears falling freely. He knew, she whispered, her voice breaking like old glass. He knew where the child was. She dabbed her eyes with the sleeve of her shawl. Not because he saw him, but because he felt him. As only a mother, or a spirit can. Her words struck him like a blow. He sank into the chair opposite her, feeling the weight of every lesson he'd ever taught about nature's cruelty and beauty. He remembered teaching children in the village school, the tiger's teeth used for hunting, its roar a warning to respect its domain. All data, all facts, numbers in a ledger, paw prints in the mud. Yet here was the truth, played out beneath the moon and among the reeds. I've spent my life cataloging tracks, studying prey and predator, he confessed softly. But I suddenly realized that all my knowledge of forest beasts was nothing but numbers and facts. The truth lies in their actions. She nodded, her tears catching the morning light. You have seen it with your own eyes. That is the greatest knowledge of all. He left her cottage with the grandmother's words echoing in his mind. Around him, the forest awoke, birds flitting between pines, rabbits peering from brush. To anyone else, it was just another dawn. To him, it was a testament. He thought of the tiger, how it had watched his every step, protected them from harm, and then offered the deer as a gift. Actions that spoke of gratitude, intelligence, even empathy. That afternoon, he gathered the village council beneath the old oak in the center square. Faces turned toward him expectant, relieved, skeptical. He opened his mouth to speak of the boy's rescue, of the gift left at the gate, but no words felt sufficient. He searched their eyes and saw fear mingled with wonder, just as he had felt. Ladies and gentlemen, he began haltingly, we have always respected the forest as fearful and unpredictable. But last night, or rather, the night before last, we witnessed something beyond explanation. A tiger led us, protected a child, and repaid a debt in kindness. I cannot offer you charts or statistics. I can only tell you what I saw. He recounted each moment, the tiger's silent vigil, its steady escort, the doe laid like an offering. At the end, the crowd was quiet. Some faces shone with tears, others hardlined with disbelief. Yet none dismissed his words outright. A heavy hush settled in the square, as if the land itself listened. He expected the story to fade in time, relegated to the realm of village lore. I thought I'd forget with time, he later admitted, voice low in a rare moment of candor, but then a memory surfaced that changed everything. A week passed before the final note fell into place. A solitary visitor arrived at dawn, stepping down the winding path from the forest edge. It was the grandmother's prized shepherd dog, old and faithful, limping toward the shrine by the gate. Around its collar hung a single tuft of tiger fur, orange and black, tied with a strip of bark. The dog dropped the fur at the stones and lay down, head low but eyes bright with devotion. It did not bark, it only watched the village awaken. In its steady gaze, he read a message as clear as the tiger's own amber stare, the story was not done. The bond between man and beast reached deeper than blood or fear, it was woven of gratitude, understanding, and a promise that nature's wonders endure beyond a single night. He stared at that humble offering, lion's share of proof more potent than any map or ledger. And he knew then that he would never stop telling the tale, that every retelling would carry the weight of his own transformation, from skeptic armed with facts to witness awed by the living spirit of the wild. Because sometimes the greatest truths are not learned in textbooks, but in the silent deeds of creatures we thought we knew. A week later, the dogs began their frantic barking once more, sharp yelps echoing through the pre-dawn hush. He woke to the familiar call, heart clenching at the memory of that night, but he forced himself up and slipped outside. The air was cool, damp with the promise of morning mist. In his hand, the old rifle felt heavier than ever, but his resolve was simple, he had to see. At the forest's edge, he stopped short. There, framed between two ancient pines, stood the tiger. The same majestic beast, its coat still gleaming in the pale light. It paused on the threshold of the trees, powerful shoulders squared, and turned its head toward him. In that moment, man and tiger locked eyes across the thin barrier between civilization and wild. He swallowed, his throat thick. Every memory surged back, the way the tiger had guided them, protected the boy, offered its gift of life and sustenance. He felt tears sting at the corners of his eyes, tears not of fear, but of something far deeper, an overwhelming sense of gratitude and awe. For a long moment, neither moved. The jungle birds held their song, the wind stilled in deference, and the world seemed to pause with them. He could almost hear a voice in the tiger's gaze, a rumbling echo in his bones that said, "Now you understand." The tiger's tail flicked once, slow and deliberate, then it turned. Its massive form pivoted gracefully, as if it weighed each movement with care. He watched its back recede into the darkness, muscles rippling beneath striped fur. It did not hurry. It did not break stride. It left in that measured walk, a farewell worthy of the silent bond they now shared. He stood rooted where he was, tears slipping unchecked down his cheeks. He felt them fall, heavy and warm, for the loss of something he had never truly owned but had come to cherish more deeply than words could hold. It was the end of an extraordinary chapter, yet in that moment, the beginning of a new life. He closed his eyes and let the tears flow. He did not fear the tiger, he mourned the parting of a guardian who had shown him the heart of the wild. When he opened his eyes again, the forest was empty, no glowing eyes, no rustle of fur, only the quiet breath of dawn and the echo of paws on the forest floor. He turned and walked back along the narrow path to the village. Each step felt like a promise to remember, to honor the lessons learned in moonlight and mud. Neighbors met him at the gate, their faces bright with questions and wonder. He could not speak of everything he felt, how the tiger's final glance had spoken of trust, of wisdom, of an unspoken covenant between their worlds. Instead, he raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the forest. "He's gone," he said softly. "But he left us more than a memory. He left us understanding." They nodded, eyes glistening. Some crossed themselves, others ran fingers along the shrine of stones and wildflowers they had built. All felt the shift in their world, the line between human and nature forever blurred. He wiped his cheeks on his sleeve and took a steadying breath. A new day had begun, not just in the sky but in his heart. He realized he could never live as he had before, chasing trophies, marking territories, believing the wild was only to be conquered or feared. Now he carried something more profound, respect born of shared experience, humility taught by a creature of fang and paw. That evening, as the sun sank and the sky turned amber, he knelt before the shrine once more. He placed a fresh branch of pine among the stones, his fingers shaking with reverence. He whispered a vow he could scarcely believe he was making, to protect the forest, its creatures, and the fragile bridge between their worlds. Above, the pines swayed in a gentle breeze. He half expected to hear the soft padding of paws, the rustle of stripes in the undergrowth. But the tiger was gone. Yet its presence lingered, woven into the air and the beating of his heart. He rose, head held high. Tears had dried on his cheeks, leaving lines of salt and resolve. He would tell the story, in the schoolhouse, at the council, by the hearth, so that no one would doubt the miraculous guardian who had walked among them. He would never live the same way again. And that, he knew with absolute certainty, was the greatest gift the tiger had given him. He stopped laying snares at dawn and gathering pelts at dusk. The rifle that once hung across his shoulders was returned to its rack, unused. Instead, he donned a worn green vest and patrolled the forest paths with quiet reverence. Every morning, he slipped between the silver birches and moss-draped pines, listening for the rustle of deer hooves and the distant echo of bird calls. His mission was no longer to take life, it was to guard it. Villagers soon noticed the change. They spotted him kneeling beside a fallen sapling, uprooting invasive weeds. They saw him guiding lost hikers back to the trailhead, and rescuing cubs tangled in barbed wire. At night, he sat by the flickering lantern light in the schoolhouse, sharing stories with wide-eyed children who hung on every word. One crisp autumn morning, he stood before a circle of first graders, their small faces expectant under bright hats. On the chalkboard behind him he had drawn a simple sketch of a tiger, its stripes bold against white. This, he told them, voice steady but warm, is not just a beast of fear. It is a mind alive with purpose. A little girl raised her hand. "Do you believe the tiger knew where the boy was?" she asked, voice trembling with hope. He paused, brushing a lock of silvering hair from his brow. For years, he had measured everything, tracking, habitats, prey patterns. But those facts now felt hollow without the beating heart of witness. He met the child's gaze and answered quietly, "I do not believe. I know." A ripple of amazement passed through the room. The children sat straighter, as if they, too, could suddenly perceive the world beyond numbers. He smiled softly and continued, "He saved us. And he showed that animals remember, understand, and forgive. Sometimes, better than we do." Outside, the wind stirred golden leaves across the schoolyard. A hush of wonder settled among the small faces. He watched as one boy clutched his notebook tighter, scribbling furiously. Another child whispered to a friend, pointing toward the dark line of pines beyond the playground. The forest no longer seemed distant, it felt alive with possibility. After class, parents stopped him in the hallway, pressing warm mugs of tea into his hands. They spoke of curiosity sparked in their children, questions once never asked. They thanked him for opening their eyes to the wild heart dwelling just beyond their fences. He returned home late, lantern in hand, and passed the little shrine beneath the oak. The wildflowers had gone to seed, but the circle of stones remained strong. He knelt, touching the cool surface of one smooth rock, and remembered the tiger's final farewell. Every emotion he had felt, the fear, the awe, the vow to change, resurfaced in a single breath. In the months that followed, he organized patrols with the local rangers, teaching them to respect spoor as messages, not trophies. He led guided walks for visitors, pointing out tiny footprints in the soft earth and explaining how a giant cat might pause to listen to the forest's heartbeat. His days once defined by the hunt were now shaped by protection and teaching. Late one evening, as he closed his gate, he heard the dogs bark once more. He paused and looked toward the tree line, but saw only shadow. He exhaled, his breath misting in the cool air, and walked inside without a backward glance. He no longer expected miracles. Yet, he believed in them more deeply than ever. He placed his hand over his heart, feeling its steady thrum. He thought of that night at the gate, of every silent step the tiger had taken behind them, of the doe laid out like an offering. He realized the true miracle was not that a predator had become a guide, but that one man's heart could change so completely. If your heart is racing right now, you know. Subscribe to the channel. Here we tell the truth. He walked the same gravel path he had taken that night, stepping over the drifting leaves as dawn's first light brushed the treetops. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of pine and damp earth. His footsteps echoed softly, each crunch a reminder of how long it had been since he'd last stood beneath these ancient branches. Every step tugged at memories, of trembling dogs, of whispered prayers, of a silent guide more majestic than any human soul. At the gate where he had first seen the tiger, he paused. The wooden pickets were the same pale gray, weathered by seasons of rain and sun. He reached out and pressed a finger against the rough surface, tracing the grain that had felt warm under the tiger's gaze. He closed his eyes, recalling the moment his heart had stopped, the breath caught in his chest as those amber eyes met his own. He stepped through the gate and followed the faint hoofprints imprinted in the soft dirt, relics of the doe that had laid its life before the village. The circle of stones still stood at the forest's edge, wildflowers now wilting but petals still clinging stubbornly to their slender stems. He knelt beside them, fingertips brushing the smooth stones as if they held secrets. He whispered a quiet vow of gratitude, to the forest, to the child who had been saved, and to the guardian he could never truly repay. The path narrowed as he moved deeper into the woodland, shafts of light cutting through the canopy in golden beams. Birds awakened, trilling songs that seemed to welcome him home. He inhaled deeply, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. Here, beneath the soaring firs, he had learned to see beyond fear and fact to something more profound, the living spirit of nature itself. He paused at the bend where the tiger had first led them, the place where hope had seized his heart. The earth was soft there, moss cushions covering tangled roots. He closed his eyes and listened. For a long moment, there was only his breath and the rustle of leaves. Then, a distant roar rolled across the forest, low and resonant. It was not a roar of hunger or rage, it was a statement of presence, a voice declaring, "I am here." He stood still, chest tightening as the sound reverberated through the trees. His eyes flicked toward the depths of the woods, where shadows pooled beneath giant trunks. The roar came again, closer this time, yet still distant enough to be a whisper on the wind. He felt it not as a threat, but as a greeting, a confirmation that the guardian still watched over these lands. "He's out there," he said softly, voice cracking with awe. "I feel it. Not as a beast. As a brother." Tears glistened in his eyes, tears of remembrance, of wonder, of a bond forged under the pale moonlight and sealed in daylight's first glow. He had lived a lifetime believing the wild was to be feared or conquered. Now he understood it could also offer kinship beyond words. He imagined the tiger stepping through the trees in that same measured pace, stripes rippling like flowing water, eyes aglow with ancient wisdom. He pictured the great cat pausing at the edge of this very glade, nodding in acknowledgement before slipping back into the forest's embrace. He drew a trembling breath and pressed both hands against his chest, feeling his heart beat with gratitude. It throbbed not with fear, but with reverence, for the creature that had guided them, for the mystery that remained, and for the transformation wrought in his own soul. For a moment, he considered calling out, offering thanks into the silent air. But words felt too small. Instead, he simply stood there, head bowed in solemn respect, allowing the roar's echo to wash over him one last time. The forest grew quiet once more. Sunlight filtered down in lazy shafts, illuminating motes of dust that danced like fireflies. He exhaled, feeling the weight of the moment settle into peace. He turned and began to walk back toward the village, each step steady, each breath filled with a new purpose. At the gate, neighbors greeted him with gentle nods. Their faces carried the same wonder and belief that his own did. Children peered up at him with wide eyes, as if expecting him to speak of miracles. He offered them a soft smile, understanding that some truths were better felt than explained. He pushed the gate open and slipped through, the latch clicking softly behind him. The world beyond the forest awaited, fields to tend, duties to fulfill, stories to share. But he would never again walk these paths as a skeptic armed with facts. Now he carried something far greater, the conviction born of experience, the certainty that wonder exists beyond the edge of fear. He looked back one final time at the dark line of trees against the brightening sky. No glowing eyes watched him. No rustle of striped fur whispered farewell. Yet he felt the tiger's presence more keenly than ever, in the scent of pine, the cry of the birds, the heartbeat in his chest. He raised a hand in silent tribute, then turned and walked away. He did not doubt that the guardian still roamed these woods, vigilant and watchful, a brother spirit in fur and fawn. If someone had told him all this before, that a predator could become a protector, that a man could find kinship in a beast, he would not have believed it. But it happened. And he was there. And he was not alone. If your heart is full of reverence right now, type, "Nature is wiser than us."